So we have the defined areas, the defined centers, and the undefined centers.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting is that what that means, if you think about it, is that we are intended, we are designed to interact with each other in order, because we have all these areas in our chart where we don't carry certain energy signatures. So that means that we're here to learn about them from other people in our interactions.
Right.
Human design reveals who you are energetically and who you came here to be. I'm Dana, the human design specialist.
And I'm Haley, the human design newbie. Listen in as we explore how leaning into your authentic self is your ultimate path to success. Today, we're diving into.
The centers.
You seem unsure.
I was waiting for you to say it. I wasn't sure. We didn't review that part.
No, the topic part is you.
Is it always me? Oh.
Yes, it's always you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. It's the
then
centers.
Because then I have to say dun dun dun.
Oh, I ruined it for you. So, the centers. Now we get into really one of my favorite parts is the centers.
Why?
Because what we've covered so far, when you look at human design, with the strategy type, strategy authority, that's very much how to use it in the sense of navigating your everyday life, and it gives you those decision-making processes and everything. But what the centers do is start taking it to another layer. So when you're looking at the Bodygraph, it can reveal a lot more information about your own way of doing things, maybe how you've done it up till then. I guess a lot of times they call it human design conditioning, which has a negative kind of connotation to it. But conditioning can be negative or positive. It's actually kind of neutral. It's just what your experience has been so far.
Makes me think of conditioning for a sport.
Well, that's training. Conditioning
No,
for
you
a
had to do
sport is training.
conditioning.
But the conditioning is training, is it
Well,
not?
no, we would do condition like for volleyball, we would have our summer conditioning, which is like we would spend a week just in the weight room basically, and then because we couldn't technically touch a volleyball yet. We would start, I don't know, there was some rule, I guess. You had to like it had to be a certain day before you could actually start training with a volleyball. And so we would spend like a week conditioning in the weight room. So
I
that's
think
I
that
was
is
thinking of
what
conditioning.
conditioning, that sense, is making you stronger, I guess. I suppose more in athletic shape after you guys have turned to dough over the summer. I think that's what they do. All that sitting around on the beach, hanging out. You need to get a little muscle mass going. No, this is a different kind of conditioning. So basically, what I like about looking at the centers is it can give you a lot more information about yourself as you are now. Really, you can see how you're designed to be, but then when you say you can see your conditioning, it's because we can see the areas within our energetic makeup that we tend to be more influenced by others. Okay, so that's kind of the overview. So where would you like to start?
I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. I could just keep talking, but I keep waiting for you to ask me a question, help direct me. If I start going too long talking, you got to let me know because
Okay.
I could keep going. So, okay. So when we look at the Bodygraph is a map. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a view of what's going on within us, so to speak. So it's representing what is actually energetically happening inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so the centers are the shapes that you'll see on the body graph. You'll see 9 of them, the total. You'll see triangles and you'll see squares. Those are the centers. So what we need to first, before we go into the individual centers, is we need to talk about the definition in the centers. What is a defined center and what is undefined? Okay.
Yes.
So if you're
I think I remember.
if you're looking at the body graph, you'll see the 9 shapes. And they will either be colored in or they will be white. So, yes. You have a question?
I'm trying to think what they're colored in. Like, are they colored in corresponding to the color of the shape? Because the shapes are different colors.
Yes, there's there are different colors, but there's only brown, green, yellow, and red in the human design system. I think I've said before, I like making graphics for pretty things. Sometimes when I'm just looking at just the centers, not the whole system, or working with someone looking at their body graph, I like to use different colors that are more corresponding with the chakras. But because I have a longer background history with familiarizing myself with those colors, which are like colors of the rainbow. And the reason for that is because in the chakra system, the different centers vibrate at a different frequency. So you know how light works with the rainbow. So like the red is a
Different
lower wave, or a slower wave, I should say.
Shorter. I think it's shorter and longer.
Yeah, it's a longer wave. It's not as vibrationally intense. So it's more dense, and then it's a denser energy in the body. But then as it moves up the chakra system, it gets to the higher frequencies, and that's where you get the different colors because they correspond with light. However, that's different from the human design system. It's not represented in the same way, and it doesn't work the same way. So the centers that are colored in, it doesn't matter what color they are, but they're going to have color in there. Those are your defined centers. And the defined centers are centers where you carry more consistent, reliable energy. So I would also like to say, as an overarching thing as we move forward, that when you're looking at the chart and the whole system, and you've got all these centers, you've got all these gates, you've got all these channels, the important thing to remember is that this is a representation of what it means to be human as a whole. And so each theme that's represented in the chart through the gates and the channels and everything, we all have all of the chart. It's present within all of us. Sometimes people will look at a chart and say, oh, I don't have gate 42, so I don't have access to that energy. That's not true. We all have all of the chart, and it's really just a matter of how we experience those energies, whether they are consistent and reliable within us, or like it's something we always carry and express, or if it's something that we learn about from others. So that's important, because in your defined areas, your colored in areas, those are the areas where you are consistent. You always carry that energy with you. And if you are undefined, if you have undefined centers, the white centers, those are areas where your energy is more variable. You're receiving from others. So if you think about defined is like broadcasting a signal out, because that's the energy signature that you carry. It's sharing it with everyone around you. Whereas the white centers are open and receiving signals from others. You follow?
Yes. And definition is caused when a center is connected to another center through a channel, correct?
Correct.
I
There's
to
your
make
first
sure I had that
star
right.
for this episode.
Yes.
A star count. Yes. So everybody will carry definition either through centers or gates, because the gates are it's all determined by the neutrinos and the planets and what was happening in the cosmos the moment you were born. So we all carry some sort of definition. The only type that will have no centers defined is the
Reflector.
Correct. Yeah, reflectors have gates defined, but none of them connect through channels to other centers. So that would make them a reflector. So already that could tell you that person as a reflector is receiving information from their environment at all times because they don't have any definition. So they are always receiving. Okay, so we have the defined areas, the defined centers, and the undefined centers. And so what's interesting is that what that means, if you think about it, is that we are designed to interact with each other in order, because we have all these areas in our chart where we don't carry certain energy signatures. So that means that we're here to learn about them from other people in our interactions.
Right.
We talked about human babies and how we're just
Human
like
babies.
human babies. Well, I almost said they're useless. They're hopeless.
They're helpless.
Helpless. I love babies.
They're so useless.
That is so awful. Gosh, no, that's not true. That was a slip. I guess I do love babies. They're adorable.
Little Freudian slip there, huh?
No, I think babies are adorable, but they're born helpless and
Yes.
need to rely on the adults, mainly adults, in their life in order to survive. In turn, that means that as you grow from baby to child, in your childhood, you're in an environment where you're learning everybody else's beliefs and traditions and the way they do things in the world. And that's the way it's intended because we have to take care of the babies, but that's also where our original sources of conditioning come from and take on, because we are not only being imprinted through our open centers, but just imprinting in general because we were relying on these other people's knowledge of the world in order to learn how to navigate the world.
Because, isn't it up until like the age of 6 or 7 or something is like the most formative years of a human?
Yeah, totally. And even somewhere it's something around the first couple years, it's around 2 or so. A lot of times the baby does not even realize like the mother is a separate being. Like they just think the mother is an extension of themselves. And so that's when you start to see them, when they start to realize that they are, they have their own needs and their own way of getting things, their own way of communicating and stuff like that, it gets interesting because there was no differentiation between in the baby's mind, that little unformed mind we talked about.
Maybe that's why they're the terrible twos.
Well, in a way they are. They start noticing they have their own, not so much autonomy. They do still need, but adults, but they're starting to realize like, hey, this is my own vehicle.
This is my arm.
I can operate this thing. But anyway, so, we're designed to rely on our parents and our families to teach us these things, but at the same time, it can teach us ways of being that might not be correct for us energetically. And so life becomes a process of, if you look at it and try to become aware of it, of pulling apart what is what you really are and what is what other people have told you what you are. And this can be a really difficult thing to do, especially if you don't have human design, which I didn't. When I started this process, I didn't. And so the last couple of years being able to look at my design, and it really just confirmed a lot of things I had grown to know about myself already because I had been doing a lot of this stuff, but it really helped really pinpoint some layers of, I could see where I took on other people's beliefs about who I am or what I should do or how you should do things based on where my open centers are.
Do you have like a biggest realization about yourself since like really learning about your design?
I think in some ways, well, yeah, there's a couple. One of them would just be the whole type thing and the strategy and the authority, because knowing that I'm meant to respond to life, and it's responding to things outside of me, not just, I mean, I can have a thought of what I want to happen, but I have to respond to an outside cue or clue or sign. You know, I love signs. I love being like, oh, it's a sign. This is the time. And now I realized, oh, that's how I'm supposed to do things. So that was cool. But like we talked about in the last one about authority, realizing that I have an emotional authority and I'm not supposed to be super spontaneous in my decisions, and that it does take me more time than other people, not everybody, but some people, to make decisions that are correct for me, and how to find that, and to realize that I'm just emotional like that wave. And sometimes I'm just going to be moody, and I used to always try to figure out a reason why, but sometimes there's just not a reason why. I just don't feel like it, and it's just natural for me. And then the other thing would be when I saw in my design, a lot of things in my design, but there's a lot of what we talk about circuitry, and which is, future things we'll get into, how we're wired. Basically, there's circuitry or themes that are themes between certain channels connecting certain centers and gates, that some are individual, tribal, and collective, and they have themes, and individuals about the own process. Tribal is about, your home, your family, and taking care of your people. And collective circuitry is about sharing with the collective, the energy you bring, and how those themes are collective themes meant to help the collective. And I have a large part of my design. We all have a mix of all of them, but I have a lot of individual. And I've always had this kind of feeling of belonging, but not belonging, like wherever I am. And I used to think I was weird, but now I can see themes in my design of that's kind of the role I play, is kind of being in things, but not really a part of things. Like I can dip a toe in and out all the time. So it's just helped me understand myself better. But I digress. So let's get on to the centers, because you're supposed to be reining me in.
I asked the question because I wanted to know. Otherwise, I would just keep thinking about it and not pay attention to what you're saying.
Inquiring minds want to know. Okay, so defined and undefined centers. So that means that based on the center, defined, you're going to have the themes within that. The themes within that center are going to be consistent themes. And then within each center itself, there's going to be multiple gates that you may or may not have defined. You'll have at least one, because you have to have a channel to create definition. But the center itself will have overarching themes for all those gates and energies and channels. Make sense? Okay. All right. So let's just kind of dig in to each one. I guess we'll start at the top.
At the top. I was going to fuss if you didn't.
Oh, yeah. What's that? No, I'm going to start.
Oh, because you go to start at the top.
Yeah. You would like that, because you have a defined head. And Ajna. Okay. So the top triangle at the top of the body graph is the head center.
Yes.
And this is the center of ideas, inspirations. It's like the connection to source, the divine connection to source, or whatever you want to call it. What do we call it? We could call, I've heard people call it Gus. I do like Gus. Did we talk about
Gus?
That? God,
no.
Universe, source, whatever you want to call it, Gus.
I like Gus.
Yeah. I heard that on another. I think I first heard that on Emma Dunwoody's podcast, Gus.
I like Gus. Sums it up.
Doesn't sound so like hooey and new agey, right?
Just Gus.
So
okay.
The head center is the center of ideas, inspirations, connection to Gus, imagination, and questions and questioning. And it's one of two pressure centers in the system. The other one is the root. It's a pressure system.
What is the pressure system? Pressure system or pressure center?
Center. The two pressure centers, the head and the root. So basically, our whole human experience is this pressure sandwich. Yes, exactly. It's the pressure to get all these to comprehend and make sense of the world as we know it. All these questions and trying to really just, what does it mean? What does all of it mean? And why does it all happen? It's this pressure to know, right? And so if we look at the whole population, there's going to be people are defined and undefined in these areas. And so in the defined head center population is about 30%. So not as many people defined in the head center, right? So you have a defined head.
I do.
I do not have a defined head center. So we have definitely differences here. So as a defined head, you are an inspirational force in the world because that center is always connected to source, to Gus. It is always on, right? So you're always asking questions and probably feel like something's wrong if you don't have the answer to it. But you don't have to have the answer to it. And you are always coming up with ideas. You can have inspirations. You have just a lot of access to that energy at all times. It's like you describe. Let me ask you this. Do you have a constant chatter in your head?
I don't think so. I mean, whenever you talk about the definition of my head, the only one that I could recognize myself is the questions. Because I'm like, how does this work? Why is it like that?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
that's what I'm always trying to figure out.
I would say that you have a lot of ideas because I have an open head, and when it's an open area, that's where I'm taking in, receiving, amplifying back. I feel a lot more inspired around you and have the ability
I
to
don't like
come up. You don't realize necessarily you're broadcasting all these ideas out, but and also in your environment with Presley, he has a defined head as well. So you both could be pretty much in your own heads. You're not really going to be, picking up on each other's thoughts that much. Well, okay, so we've talked about defined and a little bit undefined. Let me finish this. The undefined 70% of the population, and obviously kind of gleaning from what we just said, there is not a consistent or fixed way of undefined heads to receive information. It can come from anywhere, and it often does. It comes from anywhere and everywhere. And so undefined heads are open to all thoughts and all inspirations. And so quite often when around others, people with open head or undefined heads could become kind of a little overwhelmed, lost, doubt, confusion, and really thinking about things and concerns and questions that don't even belong to them. Right? So, and then you can feel pressured to make decisions and figure out and solve problems for things that don't even pertain to you. And so you spend a lot of mental energy thinking about things that aren't important. And I would like to point out the realization we had, or I had, I should say, one of the last times we had a family gathering, which I think was Thanksgiving, with your aunt and uncle, I think. Shout out.
Uncle Dan, Aunt Nancy?
Yeah.
No, that wasn't Thanksgiving. That was before.
Ian's
That was in
graduation?
October. No, because
No.
only Nancy. It was October because it was right after. Was it October?
Well, it doesn't really
thought
matter
it was-
when it was.
Anyways.
Point being, I realized, because I know everybody's human design chart, as I looked around the room, so I have an undefined head. Actually, it's completely open. Some people would say, which means it's undefined and there are no gates activated in my head center.
Right.
Okay. So it's really receptive.
It's real open.
And your dad is the same. He has the same. And I think your brother is the same as well. But you are defined, all three head gates. Not three channels, but you have one channel. Presley has all three head gates. He has another channel. Your Aunt Nancy has the same as you configuration. Your Uncle Dan is also defined head. And let me tell you, I realize that I'm the one that is always just in the scenario with, I love all of you dearly, but I'm a mess around all of you sometimes because I am worried about what everybody's thinking and what's going on. And I realize all four of you could care less and are not really paying attention to what the other people in the room are doing.
You know why? You know, a very, very evident point of that
Hmm.
is the oxygen deprivation experiment.
Well, that was true, and that's an inside
But
joke.
we were,
That was
but we were like me, Presley, Nancy, and Dan. We were all kind of doing our own thing, and you were the one that noticed it all.
that observed that all of you are all doing really weird individual things. I did. That's a good point. We were playing a game and we were having a break, and your uncle's rattling equations in the corner. Your aunt's
He was doing
shuffling
math.
cards. I don't know.
I think she was shuffling. I don't know.
I don't know. It looked like a moment of insanity, that's for sure. But yeah, it's like that. It's like all of you were all in your own processing and your own minds, and you weren't really concerned with what anybody else was thinking about. And I was just observing and thinking about all of the things at once. And it creates a lot of anxiety for me that I used to not understand. But now I do. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, well, so now maybe in those environments I can just chill.
You're like, they don't know. They are not paying attention.
Yeah. So that's kind of how that functions. The open head will pick up on everybody else's inspirations, ideas, and whatever they have going on. And then your dad, he's undefined Ajna, and that's a whole nother story. At least I'm defined Ajna, but he's often not even in the room.
No.
Just leaves. And then when he is in the room, he tries to entertain all of us. So yes. Anyways, so that's the head center. Started to
Next.
say something else. Next, the Ajna. And it's very interesting to me that this is the one center that is named, well, I mean, they're all kind of named the same, but why it stuck with the Ajna, I don't know. Why they don't call it
because that's all that is that a specific chakra in the Hindu system?
Yeah. So
that's one of the name.
Mm-hmm, it's the same. So I think the head center in humans are not human sign in the chakra system called the crown chakra. So the third eye chakra, where what we're talking about now, is not a chakra. It's the Ajna. The Ajna is the mind. It's an awareness center, and it's mental awareness. So it is thoughts, conceptualizing. It's like really, literally how you think, like the processes of how you think, your opinions. So it's more structures, like taking all the ideas and inspirations from the head center, and bringing them down into the mind and trying to conceptualize and think about how you're going to eventually get that information out into the world through the throat.
I this whole time thought the head, the top one, was the mind. I just hadn't thought about it further.
Well, we do kind of interchange those words around here a lot, mind and head, like get out of your head, get out of your mind, those kind of things. So that is used a lot, I think, in our language and our culture interchangeably. But in this instance, no, the head is like a connection to source and ideas and everything coming down into the human awareness and then going into the Ajna, the mental awareness of how do I translate this down into language, communication. So it's the way of thinking. And so 47% of the population is defined. You and I are both defined here because if you have a defined head, you have to have a defined Ajna because that means...
Because it's the only connection.
Right. It's the only
possible connections.
That's right. And
for the head.
Right. And so my Ajna is defined through the throat. So if you're defined in these areas, you tend to think in a consistent way and are not as easily influenced by others' opinions. Likely to always be thinking, always processing information, and even when you don't need to be. So like people with defined ajnas enjoy mental stimulation, doing the word search or Wordle. I love Wordle.
I haven't done it in a few days.
I
I
haven't
like
done it in
Sudoku.
a week or so. I can't do numbers.
Mhm.
I know that has to do with numbers. Don't like them. Which makes sense though, because the gates that I have defined are more in the knowing circuit, which is what it suggests, knowing, but you have a lot of logical circuitry, so you do probably like numbers and things, and I'm like, I can't compute. It does not work. I'm always like, which you remember how you like baking and I like cooking because it's not
Because you don't like
precise.
how precise.
Oh, I just kind of know what to do. So, we were talking about your defined ajna. We were talking about the mental
Mhm.
stimulation, but you also probably have a hard time clearing your mind sometimes and finding silence. I think especially with that connection, that head connection as well. And we tend to, with defined ajnas, want to make decisions from thinking. And thinking is not how you make a decision. It can help you turn a decision over and over and over and over again in your head. But in order to make a decision, you should trust your
Me personally, my
everybody,
spleen. I
your
don't know.
strategy and
Search strategy.
authority. So authority, yeah, that's your spleen. So true. Okay, so undefined then, 53% of the population. Now, this is literally somebody with an open mind. They are open-minded. They can see all sides to a situation, usually fair. They don't really think in one linear way. They don't do things always the same. They're not always thinking the same. They can be a lot more open to new ideas, considered more literally out of the box thinkers, because if you think about it, they're not structured, they're not stuck in these certain ways and patterns of how they process their information. They're open to lots of different ways. So say somebody with an open ajna, if they were around you with more logical circuitry, they might look at things a little more logically, whereas with me they might be a little more kind of open. And you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, it's very interesting that more of the population is undefined in the head. Just kind of when you think about the kind of the state of the US, especially
Mm-hmm.
how it's kind of a little bit of a shit show.
Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting because it just definitely shows that people aren't paying attention or living by their design in any mean. That
Mm-hmm.
I would think if 53% of the population is more open-minded, then things
Well, they're
wouldn't get
more
so
easily
heated.
influenced. They are influenced by what is happening around them and who they're around. So, like I said, they're not fixed in one. Now, it doesn't mean ideology. We're not talking about ideology. It's literally
Mhm.
just how they process things. So, if they are in an environment, I mean, you can see how it gets kind of tribal in a way. If they are in an environment where the people around them have very fixed ways of seeing things and looking at things, some of them may be defined and some undefined. And you'll find that maybe sometimes the more opinionated people are undefined because they're amplifying the energy of those around them. But they could be easy to change their mind too, depending on where they go, right? And who they're around, they could change their mind. It's not a bad thing to change your mind.
Don't they
Find that.
say that's changing your mind is like, or admitting you're wrong or something like that is like a sign of growth?
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, absolutely. I don't mean to laugh at it like, duh. But,
You're like, duh.
well, yes, absolutely. Because that means you are able to look at another side of things. And that's the tendency is to want to just dig in and have your own beliefs. But that's what this is another beautiful thing about looking at the system and the way we're defined in these areas, because it can make it okay to understand that somebody is going to be a little bit more open-minded, or they might have a certain way of looking at things that you may not. And if you
Mhm.
know them personally and you can look at their design, you could see where those areas are. And if not, you could just, say, well, maybe that person just not open to change. And so let's see. Also about undefined. Oh, if you are undefined, not really here to over-identify, like we're talking about, with one school of thought. So your mind is kind of an open mental playground, source of free and creative thinking. I will say this about undefined Ajna, especially with an undefined head center. All that openness could really just make a really open mind person that just kind of follows their creative ideas or, changes, depends on who they're with. And I think personally with your dad, he always talks about his memory. And I think he's sensitive to it, but he thinks he doesn't have a good memory. And there is a case for that for sure. And I think, it can be also influenced by his open head and open Ajna, in the sense that he's not designed really to retain a lot of information, because he's designed to always be open to more, and to look at things differently than other people and process things differently, which makes him so creative and the genius that I think he is. He's just,
oh yeah,
we know that he's somebody that can learn, fix, or do really anything he puts his mind to.
Yeah, and sometimes he'll do it if he just comes in from outside. He looks over your shoulder what you're doing, but he also will say it to people on TV. He's like, "Oh, I wouldn't have done it that way," or "Why'd you do it that way?" Because he can just see a better or a different way to do it.
Definitely different. He can look at things differently. He does gather information from lots of sources, but then he usually, does it his own way. And I've tried to tell him that he's not necessarily meant to hold on to all these thoughts. They're just meant to influence him, and he can use them. But then I also think it could be a function of just not paying attention, because there is so much he's being bombarded with all the time. I think a lot of times he's just not paying attention. I don't know if he'll listen to this podcast either. I gave him an episode and I still don't think he's listened to it.
I don't think any of the men in our life will listen to it.
It's okay. It's fine. All right.
It's not for them.
So that is the Ajna Center. It's going to take a while.
We might have to make this a two-parter.
We'll see. All right. So the next center is the throat center. So the throat center is a manifestation center. And in human design, they kind of say all roads lead to the throat. It is the center of communicating and expressing, of language. And it's the manifestation center because as humans, this is how we get things to happen in the world around us. We have to be able to communicate our ideas and our thoughts, right? So 72% of the population is defined in the throat.
Really?
Defined means different than motorized, which remember we talked about that before with the types. But so if you are defined in the throat, which I am and you are not, defined means you're designed to speak, and how you speak is determined by what gates create your definition. So
what do you mean by how you're designed to speak?
Well, let's put it like this. So I'm defined through my throat is defined through the Ajna, through the channel 4323. That means I'm defined to speak about what's on my mind, about what I think.
And that would be if any of the channels from the Ajna were defined, were connected.
Yeah. And I mean, this isn't like you have to, these aren't absolutes like I have to always say this, but as far as what I tend to want to communicate to people is what I'm thinking. Right. And how I think, which I think, you hear what I'm saying, makes sense. And that's usually what people define Ajna. We'll say that a lot. I think, right? If you're connected through the throat, through the spleen, it's more of a knowing. You talk about your knowingness. I know this is true. I know this is possible. You know, it's about more of that kind of intuition and speaking about that. If you're connected through the solar plexus, which is the emotional solar plexus, it's about what you're feeling. And you might tend to say things more like, I feel. Now, remember, you could be connected in more than one area, but these are kind of the voices there. And then the G center, which is right below the throat, which is your center of love and identity. So it would be a lot about, I am type of speak. And then you could also be also connected through the will center. And that's more about what, I mean, it's an ego too, but it's about the material world. So it's really about what you are want or what you desire, those types of things. So you would hear a lot of people talking about what they want. People are connected through the will to the throat tend to be seen sometimes as more egotistical because they're always talking about themselves. But they're designed to talk about themselves, so
Comes from their will.
that's right. It can be good, seen as good or bad, but it's neither, it just is. So that is the defined center. Mainly people have a consistent way of expressing themselves and they can do that. Now, defined, like we said, doesn't mean motorized. That
Right.
means that still a lot of times with a defined non-motorized throat, you can speak, but it's best to kind of really wait until you're asked to speak, in the sense that in response, I mean, you don't have to be quiet your whole life. You can express your opinions, but in communicating with others, sometimes it's better to, wait for someone to ask you what you're thinking or feeling so they can hear you. And then the undefined, then throat center, 28% of the population, like my dear daughter here.
Shout
and
out.
again, so this is an area that you're feeling, you're receiving, I should say, energy from others, amplifying and reflecting it back. So it makes you really good at feeling the energy of communication from others. And so what needs to be said. And contrary to how I first looked at it, you would think people with defined throats would be quote unquote better communicators or speakers, but a lot of times people with undefined throats tend to be or people who speak for a living or are known to be very inspirational or even singers. They tend to have undefined throats. It's because when they're in an environment with other people, they can, this is on the energetic level, they know how to speak so the other person receives them better, because really they're picking up on their communication style, the other's communication style. And so it's interesting because they can just speak and relate to whoever they're around. They just instinctually pick it up. It's interesting. And so undefined throats have a little less control over how or when they communicate. So
Makes sense.
you could feel a little pushed or frustrated when you're asked to speak spontaneously, like put on the spot.
Yes.
Is that true, Haley?
Yes.
So you need to allow yourself time and space to communicate. And again, it's not motorized, so also to be asked for what it is you want to talk about. Now, they will say people with undefined throats kind of need to talk a little bit more, need a little bit more attention, which I will admit in this area, I'm going to admit, I don't really understand the reasoning for that, because my experience with you growing up is you were much of a talker at all.
No.
So maybe you were just naturally living out your design. You did like attention.
But didn't it take me a long time before I actually started speaking?
No, not like a long time. I mean, it wasn't unusually like developmentally wrong or anything. It was just you were a little over 2. I mean, you communicated fine, but I just don't think you were bothered to. I think because you're your defined head, I was able to read your mind all the time. I always knew what you needed. I think it really was a lot of easy to anticipate some things that you needed a lot of
You
times.
said I wasn't a fussy baby, and then Ian always was fussy.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for all that, differences between you two, for sure. Which is what's so fascinating, because people say, I had one baby as a dream and one was a nightmare, which is not what I'm saying, but I was stressed. But looking, now that I could see your design, it makes total sense why you guys are so different. You're designed differently in so many ways. I mean, for one thing, you're generator, or you're a projector and he's a generator, and that's going to feel different. But anyways, one thing about well, I think we already covered this with the throat, whether it's undefined or non-motorized, it's if you feel, if you try to speak in a situation without being asked, or, you're just pushing it out there, it might not be heard or understood. So it's always good to kind of be aware of that. Okay. Let's move on.
I get the heart or is it heart or G center? Are those the same terms?
Well, the G center, yes, the heart chakra and the chakra system split in the human design system. They said in 1781 when we became 9-centered beings as opposed to 7-centered beings. And that was the split there. So the heart chakra was always the center of love and identity and all this other stuff. And so it's just kind of split two functions. And
I just get the will center and the heart center. I get them flip flopped.
Well, it's the G center.
G center
is the one in the middle, the yellow diamond.
Triangle.
Diamond.
Not a triangle.
Not a triangle. Yellow diamond in the G center. In the center is the G center, and then the smaller triangle down to the right of it is the will center, which I refer to it the will center. It is also referred to in traditional human design as the heart center, that little one.
Oh, the will is the heart.
Yeah, but I just never really liked calling it that, and so it's kind of been interchangeable depending on who you're talking to. I go with the will center. Some people call it the ego center.
Which one's the monopole?
The G center.
The G.
Right there in the middle of the chest, the monopole. So, as you said, this is where the monopole resides.
Ooh, get that.
Center of love, identity, and direction. And so 57% of the population is defined. Okay. So when you're defined in the G center, you are more secure in your identity and love for yourself. And you can love others without becoming dependent on them. Like you have your own more stable sense of self, of who you are. You can have a sense of correct direction or mission in your life. That's a pretty bold statement, but it's possible. And can be a natural at helping point out direction for others. Okay. So you are more likely to be connected to your own center. And, that I just see it as this, the way I experience it, a G center that is defined is this solid kind of grounding in myself. Now, when I first learned about this, if somebody says, oh, you know who you are and where you're going, I say, well, no, that's not true. But then if people try to put other identities on me, no, that's not me. like I said, I can't always tell you who I am, but I can definitely tell you who I'm not. Like I just know it to my core. Mm-hmm. And for an undefined center, which is 43% of the population, undefined G, your sense of self and direction is more affected by your environment and who you're with. Because again, you are receiving that energy from others and how they see themselves. And so I see somebody with a undefined G is kind of like that chameleon. Depending on who they're with, they probably have bunches of different sets of friend groups that could all be very different, and yet they could fit in every friend group. Does that make sense?
I was kind of thinking, because I'm not defined there, so I was kind of I was like, I don't have a ton of friend groups to begin with, but it makes me sound sad. I just don't have the energy for a lot of friends.
Well, yeah. Oh, projector. Well, it's true. You actually don't, because you are very open. And so it is kind of exhausting for you to always be on and around other people.
Yeah. But I would say my friends that I do have, like, I feel like obviously they're my friends, but I feel like I fit in with them very well, even when there's like a little bit bigger of a group.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, because there is this quest to find the right people to fit in with, because you're very sensitive with an open G to your environment, to your physical environment. And so quite often I'll say, if you are in an environment that does not feel good to you, like walk into a restaurant or you go to the store, whatever, you walk into someone's house, it doesn't feel good to you, chances are the people in that environment aren't correct for you either. There's a reason for that. There's a sensitivity for that. And this just, you just don't need to be there. And so it's interesting because there's always kind of this quest. And what I've heard from people undefined G is this, when they realize this about themselves, it's kind of a relief to know that this is just literally a mechanical function of their energy, this feeling of, will I ever know myself? And no, it's always going to be kind of fluid. There's going to be changes depending on where you live and who you're with, and just kind of finding comfort to know that your sense of self is more dynamic.
It's helpful because I don't have a sense of self. I'm always asking you, I'm like, am I like this?
Well, and that's also part of your function. That is a function of you being a projector as well, because the projector aura really does kind of reach out and penetrate into the aura of others and helps you see others so clearly, but not yourself as clearly. And then, with the open G center, that also is this sense of, well, who am I really? You are meant to learn all the things from the people.
Well, it's very vague.
It's very vague, right? But when you can just kind of relax and know that really you can lean into knowing that if you are just placing yourself in an environment that feels good, the right people and the right opportunities are going to come to you, because that means you're in the right place because it feels good.
It's good to know.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And I think what's really interesting, a question that since it's the center of love and identity and self, the eternal question is, the undefined G is always like, am I lovable? Because there's like, am I lovable? Am I capable of being loved? Whereas the defined G is, can I be loved for who I am? Because I can't change. So it's just, I always mull that question over with people. It's true, because with a defined G, you just kind of have to be who you are. You can't be different than who you are. Whereas undefined, you're always looking for that sense of love and self. It's not a bad thing. It's not a sad thing. It makes it sound sad, but it's not.
Well, when you say, am I lovable?
Well, I mean, because there are people with the undefined G that if they don't know this about themselves and they keep ending up in environments or whatever where they are trying to be somebody that they think can be loved, depending on where they are, it kind of can, over time, ask that question, because maybe they're not in the right place and around the right people. So they kind of take it personally because they don't know for sure. That's why this can be helpful for people.
That is helpful.
Okay. Bailey says yes. Okay. Anyways, will center. Let's move on to the will center. So the will center is also a motor. This is one of the first motors, I should say, we're getting into. As we move through, there's 4. This is one of them. And it's also known as the ego, heart center. And it is the center of the ego and willpower, self-worth, self-value. And it deals with themes of the material world and being in the material world. So this is a pretty noticeable split here. So defined in this area, only 37% of the population is defined. And which is very, very interesting to me. That means 63% is undefined. So the defined characteristics like to be in control of your own life, resources, and prefer to do things your own way. These are people that recognize their own value and worth pretty much. I mean, We all
Mm-hmm.
carry conditioning. It all depends. None of these are absolutes in the sense that these are attributes of these centers, but very much everything here can depends on your life experience and your
Mm-hmm.
conditioning, because you can get conditioned in open or undefined and defined centers. That's just different ways of being conditioned. So that being said, more likely to recognize worth and value. And these are people that have more consistent access to actual willpower. Okay, so when they make a promise, they keep it for the most part. I mean, like I said, there's always variations, but
Mm-hmm.
this is a theme here. And so, as we talked about before, these are people, it's healthy for them to express their wants and their own value and their worth. And it's easier for the people with this energy to do that because, again, it's consistent energy for them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're undefined, means there's not a consistent energy for willpower, right? It's variable.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. And they're not designed to use willpower to succeed, nor are they designed to be overly competitive. They do not have, as I said, consistent access to willpower and often borrow it from others, which would be the people with defined centers,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so they may find that when someone with this energy leaves their auric field, they often, I mean, it's not immediate, takes some time, but they often find they no longer have access to that willpower or that energy they felt around these people. So if you think about like somebody like the big motivational speakers, I'm going to use, have you ever heard of Tony Robbins?
I don't know. The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it.
And I'm not 100% sure he has a defined will center. I've heard it been used before, this reference, but just say there's a lot of these people that give these, big inspirational, motivational speakers that can get people just really like, I can do it. I have the willpower.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go to these seminars and they get all jazzed up and they're like, I can make the commitment and I can be this person. And they are on it the whole weekend. And then they go home and a couple days later, they're like, it's gone. It's just gone. Like, where did it go? And it makes people feel bad about themselves because they don't have this consistent access to willpower. And this is also one of these areas where in our culture, society, we're told to just stick to it, use your willpower, to lose weight, to quit smoking, to do all these self-corrective things, right? You just have to have willpower.
That's Presley's belief.
I don't even know if he has a defined will or not.
I was going to ask you that because I'm very curious. I feel like he does, but I don't know if he does. But that's what I've been thinking. Because it sounds a lot of the can just do it. And same with the G Center.
No,
does he have the G Center?
He has a defined G, yeah.
Okay, that makes because he does know who he is and his.
Oh yes, he does. But again, depending on who he's been around in his environment, and everything growing up, or just beliefs carried over in his family line or coaches or teachers or whatever, we can carry these beliefs and these identities that aren't true. And that's this whole, where people tend to turn in on themselves and turn it back on themselves and feel bad about themselves. Because I'm sure there's things Presley has committed to or made a promise to himself that he's not followed through on. We all do it. But I mean, there's plenty of things, I'm sure. I mean, how's the CrossFit going? I don't know.
Or the real estate.
Yeah. I mean, it's so pervasive in our society that we just have to work hard enough and have enough willpower and we can do anything. And that just doesn't work for like 2/3 of us. It's not true. It doesn't mean we can't succeed and it doesn't mean we can't do the work, but we should never have to fall into this belief that there's something wrong with us if we don't have that consistent access to willpower.
Yeah. I mean, we can't, if we don't have the defined, we can't do it alone. We may still be able to do the things, but we have to do it with the help of someone that has that access.
Yeah. Or we just come at it a different way. And so like the best thing for someone with an undefined center is to not necessarily make promises, especially to yourself, that you can't fulfill. And little things are no problem. But if and this is where using your strategy and authority comes in, especially if you're sacral, you'll have that yes or no to know if this is something you can commit to. If you're emotional, obviously you should wait over time to see if it's something you commit to, right? But you just have to, this is where knowing the strategy and authority can help you navigate these areas where we've been told that there's something wrong with us if we can't do it, and be like, well, no, that's just not how I do it. Right. And so also in this center, this kind of ties into this whole thing of whether or not you can just do it or not, is, as I said, it's a center of value, self-value and self-worth. And so people undefined in these areas tend to struggle with self-worth because they just don't, because let's put it this way. People can struggle with lack of self-worth. It can be a big issue because the world, society puts value on confidence, right? And willpower and drive as the keys to succeeding, right? Like we were talking about material success. But we just don't have the same motivation and themes. It just comes in different ways. So if you can value and accept yourself as you are, and always in an undefined area, just the mantra should be a defined, not area, defined will center is you don't have to prove yourself to anyone ever. It's period. Stop.
Hard stop.
Hard stop.
Hard stop.
Yeah. And that's, it's a lot of us. So it's important to know. So, okay. So as we set out on this quest to go through the centers, really thought it'd be a shorter episode. And
I'm surprised you thought it'd be a shorter episode because you said it was your favorite.
Well, I was just thinking overview, and this is very much an overview. I mean, I wasn't thinking about, we'll probably at times go into different centers, as which ones are awareness centers, motors, or, the channels, gates, things like that. But I think we will make this a two-parter and get into the other, let's see, there's 4 left, centers, because they're pretty important.
The lower half.
Yeah, they're pretty important ones. I mean, they're all important, but my non-sacral co-host here is lagging a little bit. It needs a break. It's later in the day. It's dinner time.
It's almost 7:00.
By God, it's almost midnight.
I mean, basically.
So on the next episode, we'll pick up the rest of the centers. We'll just have a to be continued.
Dun dun dun.
Oh, right on cue.
Yes. Do I get a gold star?
Yes, you get a gold star. All right, so we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.
All right, so bye.
Bye.
Well, you made it all the way to the end of today's episode, so you must have liked what you heard. If you did, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode, and perhaps leave us a good review. And if you know someone who wants to dig into all things human design with us, make sure you share this podcast with them. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Catch you in the next episode.